that's within us. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And it clearly tells us that there is evidence of things not seen. And occasionally, you'll stumble across evidence that so encourages your hope and that it builds your faith, builds upon your faith. And you just know that evidence that you're looking at is a clear message from God. God is involved. In this book that we all cherish, there is clear and a multitude of evidence written out for us to be able to examine and believe in. The ministry of Jesus and the apostles were full of incidents of mighty, life-changing evidence, was it not? You know, when we read about all those things, God was a provider of evidence. We see the evidence in the Scripture. But God is still in the business of evidence. Right? He didn't finish evidence in this book. We still have evidence that we can see. But unfortunately, many times, the evidence that we see, the credit is given to people or just darn good luck. Right? And it's not what it is at all. It is actually evidence of something. And sometimes we just don't hear about evidence that's so amazing that it can't be anything but divine intervention. So with that, I'm going to ask my lovely bride to come up here this morning.
Okay, my name is Robin Savage. I wanted to give my testimony today and tell you a little bit about me. In my past, I was raised in a Christian home. I became a Christian when I was 8 years old. I invited Jesus into my heart at Vacation Bible School in LaGrange, Illinois. That's a suburb right outside of Chicago. Later, we moved to Houston. I got baptized when I was 11 years old. I was a good Christian kid. I obeyed my parents. I cleaned my room. I did my homework. I practiced my clarinet. I made straight A's at school. I was a really good kid. But then I reached puberty. And I went to high school. And things changed. This is me when I was a senior. This was taken, I guess I don't know. Just figure it out. No. Okay, but so you wouldn't have known I was a Christian by the way I acted. The important things in my life were parties and boys and friends and popularity and even sneaking out. My mom's going to watch this video, so sorry, Mom. But Jesus took kind of a backseat in my life because then that meant if I obeyed Jesus, I couldn't have the kind of fun that I was interested in having. He was uncool to me at the time. One morning on February 5th, 1988, I got in a huge fight with my mom. I wanted to go to South Padre Island off the southern coast of Texas, between the border of Mexico and Texas. Well, she heard that there were lots of abductions going on with young girls, so she did not want me to go. And I don't blame her. We got in this back and forth yelling argument. I slammed the door, walked outside, and went to school. Well, my parents knew I was extremely rebellious. I left for school that day and told me that she had prayed for me after we got in that fight. She was like, okay, God, I give her to you. Do something. So, the next part I'm going to tell you from what I've learned from other people. I lost part of my memory after this, which is normal with a brain injury, so I will explain. So I was driving home in my Plymouth Horizon, and there's my wonderful car right there. The weather was horrible. It was freezing rain. And I remember my defroster didn't work, so I would unroll my passenger side window to equalize the pressure. So my window was rolled down, which was pretty cool. I'll tell you in a minute. So I was turning left in my subdivision. I started to spin. on the icy roads to the left. An oncoming car didn't have time to stop, hit me on my rear passenger side. I started spinning the other direction. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, and I was thrown all around the car. There was blood inside the car, and eventually I was thrown out the window. So it was good that my window was rolled down, so I didn't have to go through the glass at least. So my friend was following directly behind me, and he saw the whole thing. He jumped out of his car and called the ambulance. And so God obviously had his hands on me from the very first moments. The ambulance drivers happened to be just down the street about 5 or 6 minutes eating breakfast, so they were able to get to me really fast. The hospital is like 20-25 minutes away. So they were able to get me emergency care right away. And when I arrived at the hospital, I immediately had emergency surgery, where the neurosurgeon did a craniotomy, where he inserted a bolt in my head with a catheter going into it to drain the blood out, because I had been thrown all around the car, so my brain had gone back and forth, and there was blood everywhere, and it causes pressure swelling, so they had to relieve that, which saved my life. So my mom arrived at the hospital first. As soon as she arrived, she was met by both the doctor and the chaplain. Whenever the chaplain and the doctor greet you at the hospital, you know it's not good news. They told her that my head injuries were so severe that I was not expected to make it through the night. In fact, after the initial evaluation, they rated me a 3 on the Glasgow Coma scale. The Glasgow Coma scale is a 1 to 15. 8 or less is a comatose patient, and totally unresponsive is a 3. So they gave me a 3. I was totally unresponsive. So fatalities occurred in the majority of patients whose score upon admission is 6 or less. My mom told me later that at that moment, the Holy Spirit brought to mind the story of Gideon in the book of Judges. You might know the story of Gideon. He was the commander of the Israel army and was going to fight against the Midianites, who had an enormous, powerful army. The Bible describes it as numerous as the sands on the seashore. The Israeli army numbered about 32,000. God told Gideon to narrow his army down to 10,000. After that, God said, "Oh, I was just kidding, Gideon. I want you to narrow it down to 300 men." So Gideon did. Gideon is feeling really unconfident at this moment. There's no way that 300 men could win among an army this big. Gideon prays to God. He goes, "God, I need some signs. Am I doing the right thing? I need some assurance." So God gave him assurance in many ways. And he didn't just do this once, he did it many times. Even though Gideon knew logically that he would be defeated against these impossible odds, he trusted and did as God told him. Sure enough, he won. Why did God do this? God knew that the Israelites would normally have boasted about themselves and their skill and their strength, and that they won the battle in their own power. So God was showing Gideon and the Israelites that their victory wasn't because of their own might or their own strength or their own skill, but that God alone fought this army for them, and that's why they won. Luke 18:17. But God said, "What is impossible with man is possible with God." By morning, there was still no improvement. Since I was in a small hospital in Northwest Houston, my father made the decision to have me life flighted to Houston Memorial Hospital in the medical center in downtown. This hospital was rated at the top 3 in the nation for trauma hospitals, for treating severe head-injured patients. So my mom and dad thought for sure that this bigger and better hospital would surely be able to help me and give me a better diagnosis. They did not like the diagnosis my previous neurosurgeon gave me, so they wanted to do everything they could. After my evaluation, my initial evaluation at the new hospital, the doctors gave the same diagnosis as the neurosurgeon at the previous hospital. My head injuries were so severe that he didn't see me surviving this. And he said if she does survive, it's unlikely that she'll ever come out of her coma and she'll remain in a vegetative state. He went on to explain my head injuries. This was taken probably about a month after I was in my coma. So I'm a month into my coma. So my head was shaved. You can't really see, but my head was shaved and I had a bulb sticking out of it. So I had a tube coming out here. So that was the only difference between that and anyway. Well, I looked pretty bad, I think. So then the neurosurgeon explained the injuries to my parents. The first one, okay, this is what happened to me in the car. I was all around the car, banging up on the windows and on the shift and on the dashboard, and my brain was going front and back, and I had a bunch of blood in the front. That's why I happened in that cap there. So whenever the blood touches the brain tissue, that's not good, and the chance of permanent disability increases, most often resulting in death in severe cases, and mine was severe. I also had an accidental injury, also called a shearing injury. This is one of the most common types of head injuries and the most deadly. I'm going through this exercise with you, if you'll bear with me, just to show you how awful my chances were of surviving. So this is best described as the tearing of the axon nerve cells in your brain that are attached to your brain stem that then take the messages to your body. The nerves were broken from the twisting of the brain around the brain stem. And they could no longer carry the nerve impulses or the information to the correct place. This is another major cause of unconsciousness and a persistent vegetative state. The outcome of this injury frequently is a coma, with over 90% of patients in severe cases never regaining consciousness. 5% of the remaining 10% die or never wake up. So the next injury I had was the brain stem injury. That's what I was just describing was twisting around. So that's the brain stem. This is best described as the motherboard of a computer. It controls the body's involuntary functions like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, swallowing, and digestion. It is located at the top of the spinal cord and relays information from the brain to the body. It also controls consciousness, awareness, movement, balance, and severe brain stem damage also causes comas with the chance of never waking up again or staying in a vegetative state. The mortality rate in the year 2008, that's the earliest I could find, was 83%, and only half of those ever survived and came out of their coma. My accident was in 1988. That was a little short of 20 years before that, so the mortality rate back then was well over 90%. When combined with the shearing injury, the twisting, and multiple brain bleeds in the front and back of my head, the chances of me surviving were pretty much zero. So at that time, there was a prayer chain going on. My entire church was praying for me. My relatives were praying for me. The local Christian radio station even put out a request to all of Houston to pray for me. The elders of my church came into my ICU, my intensive care unit, and prayed for me. Friends and all over the place were praying for me, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prayer requests. But despite the prayers, I continued to develop additional problems, reducing my odds. As I mentioned before, I had aspirated. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but I had aspirated during my car wreck, where you throw up and then you breathe it in. This caused double pneumonia, and both of my lungs eventually collapsed. So they put chest tubes, 4 on one side, 3 on the other, had me on a rocking bed. I had tubes all over my body. Then I developed a blood infection, and I had to have a blood transfusion. My veins were collapsing where they had put the tubes in all over the place. They put a feeding tube directly in my stomach because it was aggravating my nose. And they inserted a tracheotomy in my throat because they didn't want to, the tubes going down my throat would eventually damage my vocal cord. So they put a tracheotomy in my throat. I would say that the odds were against me. The doctors kept telling my parents that I was dying, and this was just the progression of things. But that didn't matter to God. So 2 weeks had gone by. The doctors continued to tell my parents not to get their hopes up, and that I would likely not survive. The next morning, my mom told me that she had prayed, "Lord, please send me either encouragement that Robin's going to be okay, or prepare me for her death. I can't live like this anymore." So just like with Gideon, she prayed for a sign. Later that morning, she was in the hospital cafeteria, and a woman walked up to her table and overheard her talking about Jesus. Then she shared a story with my mom and said, "Oh, I knew this girl once who had a brain stem injury, which was one of my injuries. And she fully recovered, and she leads a normal life, and she got married." And so my mom was like, "Okay, this is the encouragement from the Lord that I had just prayed for this morning." She got reassurance. She got reassurance from our Heavenly Father. Immediately after this encounter on that same day, it had been about 2 weeks since the day of the wreck. I was scheduled to have another CT scan. My parents were called into the doctor's office. To discuss results. This is really emotional for me. Sorry. Okay. So my neurosurgeon says, amazingly, the injury has reversed itself. The brain has twisted back to normal position. It was a miracle. And you all believe, right? I was trying hard not to cry, sorry. Every time I talk about this, it makes me cry. So, God miraculously turned my brain back to the correct position. Another neurosurgeon that was working with my doctor, said later that this was a miracle. They couldn't believe it. A short time later, I was moved in from critical intensive care to intermediate intensive care. I showed better and better vital signs. I was still in my coma, but I had showed better and better vital signs, like, for example, the Glasgow coma scale that I showed you. You can be deep, deep, deep in a coma if you're under 8, and then as you start showing more and more responses to stimuli, then they move you up. So I was moving up. I was moving up the Glasgow coma scale. So 5 weeks after my accident, I was fully conscious. The first moment I remember was seeing my mom at my bedside, and there were tons of flowers, stuffed animals, balloons, sitting on the windowsill behind her. I remember seeing a blue wall my bed was facing over the wall, and there were tons of posters and cards and all kinds of stuff from my friends and banners, and it was really nice. But I already knew when I woke up, I already knew what had happened to me. Because as you progress in a coma, you can start hearing people. Now, if you're in a really deep coma, you can't hear them, but when you move up, you can. So my mom told me every single day, Robin, you've been in a car wreck, and you're gonna be okay. So by that point in time, I couldn't talk because of my trach. I couldn't sit up in bed. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't do anything, nothing for myself. I was like a 17-year-old infant. And I wasn't in touch with reality. So I thought nothing of it. I thought that, okay, that's fine, whatever. The doctors warned my parents that I would not be the same daughter they once had, that I could stop improving at any moment. They told them to prepare to take care of me the rest of my life. My parents were questioning this, like, God, why you brought her so far. They didn't understand why God would do a miracle and then just stop. They continued praying. About 6 weeks later, my double pneumonia had healed. My tracheotomy was removed. I was able to breathe on my own. My stomach tube was removed, and I could drink a liquid diet. I could also sit up with assistance. The doctor said I was ready to go to rehab. And I went to a rehabilitation hospital. I know God picked this rehabilitation hospital out for me. It was called TIER. Maybe you've heard of it. It's world renowned. It's in Houston, Texas, and people fly all over the world to come to this rehab center. And that was the rehab center I was going to. So the doctors explained to my parents that the brain is like a computer. It had been shaken up. The damaged nerves can't be recovered, but the brain is capable of rewiring itself in different places. So we don't use all of our brain. I don't know how much we use, maybe 10%. But the healthy nerve cells can take on new functions, and they can compensate for the damage. I needed to retrain my brain, and that's what this rehab hospital was going to help me do. It was a boot camp of brain pathways. But another obstacle was kind of in the way there. It was $1,000 a day. And that is a lot of money back in 1988. My parents didn't have that kind of money. So the prayer request went out again. It went all over the place, all over my church, and just all over the place. So God probably another 100 or so praying for me at least. Insurance would only cover 10 days of inpatient therapy. Only $10,000, that was my limit. The doctor said it could take 9 months to a year of therapy for me to be ready to live independently at home. So the next day, I was transferred to the rehab center, specializing in head injuries and stroke. And this is a video of the kind of people I saw. And if you'll notice, one of these patients, or maybe two, has her head leaning to the left. That means they've had a brain stem injury. And that was only one of the injuries. But this is the kind of people that were going to this rehab hospital. This is what I saw all the time.
The main causes: automobile accidents, substance abuse, sports injury.
This is what I was going to be like if I had lived. But I wasn't mentally healed yet. I didn't understand that I should have been one of these people. It was the end of March, beginning of April by now. I underwent intensive physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy 5 days a week. it was very, very, very taxing on my body. I was exhausted by the end of the day because I had been basically sleeping for 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. This is a picture of someone who is just learning to stand, and I would. Is this a video or a picture? Okay.
This is a rehabilitation center in Massachusetts, one of hundreds in the United States. Matt has come a long way, but no one can predict if he will ever recover enough to leave.
It's hard. What word goes with this? Cat and table or dog? Dog. Good job. Father and mother. Okay. Hot and sun? Cold. There you go. Left and right. Okay, good.
This is the kind of thing that they would have me do. I just wanted to show you an example of that. So in physical therapy, I started to learn how to walk again. And what they do in this hospital is they take you back to when you were like a baby. They teach you how to crawl, then they teach you how to kneel, and then they help you stand, and they help you balance yourself, and then you take steps. It's just like learning to walk again when you're a baby. At the same time, I was going through occupational therapy for my fine motor skills. The right side of my body was damaged the worst. Here is, I would have to learn to throw like bean bags, and I was using my tongue for concentration. I would have to throw bean bags into a basket, and I would have to practice my new handwriting, my new sloppy handwriting that I would have from now on. Anyway, so I had to practice the motion of brushing my teeth and brushing my hair, coordination exercises like, you know that tower game that you put the pegs in the holes? That's the kind of stuff I did. It was like preschool. So I was also going through speech therapy. Now most of your brain, there's a lot of your brain that controls speech and cognitive abilities. So this was the most important part of my rehab. And I'll show you a video of a girl going through the kinds of stuff that I would have to do.
Okay. Food. Very good. Food. Very good. And next. Oh, excellent. Napkins. Food. Well, close. Eating. Right. You eat on this. You eat food on this. So what is this called? Food and fork, napkins, and plate. This kind of life.
And the only difference between me and this girl was that I had terrible, terrible speech problems. It was because, like I said, the large part of your brain controls your speech. So I had what they call dysarthria. That is where you sound drunk because you slur your speech so much. So my speech was tons worse than hers. I don't even know if I can even make a comparison. Anyway, this is very common in head injury patients. I also, much like this girl, I laughed at everything. Everything was hilarious to me. Even my dad's corny jokes, he loved it. I was like a small child on a mental level. I did really great that first week of therapy, of inpatient therapy at the rehab hospital. I made significant improvements each day. The first weekend I was there, they gave me special permission to go home. I attended church for the first time since my wreck. And this is a picture of me. I have a hat on, I think it was Easter Sunday. I had a hat on because it was Easter Sunday, and then also to cover up all the big, I had a big shaved patch. And you can't really tell in this picture because I covered it up with makeup, or my sisters covered it up for me, but I had horrible acne all over my face from all these drugs that I was taking. So this picture is probably better than what I really looked like. And I also had kind of a funny look in my eye, you know, when you look at people that I've showed you pictures of before in their wheelchair, that they don't look quite right in their eyes, like no one's home in there. That's kind of like what I was like, maybe not terrible, but I just had a funny look about me. So anyway, I went to church, and as I mentioned, my church had been praying for me, so they all knew the saga. They got updates all the time, and everyone was so happy that God answered their prayers. I got a standing ovation. I was like, wow, what did I do? I didn't understand. So I returned to the hospital that Sunday afternoon after church. My last several days in patient therapy. By the end of the 10 days, I had improved so rapidly, I became the star patient of the rehab hospital. My therapist couldn't believe it. They were like writing the stuff down in their journals, in the medical journals. And I was making improvements every single day, like big improvements. I was recovering so fast. It was difficult. It was really still very, very difficult for me. But God was working another miracle, that He had me improve so quickly that we didn't need the money. My family didn't need the money to have me in there for 9 months to a year, which is really the original amount of time they told me it would take before I would be independent enough to go home. But God healed me so much in 10 days that I went home. Ephesians 3:20, now to Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. So God did something that was amazing. I was able to start outpatient therapy 4 days per week. After weeks of that regimen, I was showing even more improvement physically, but I still wasn't healed mentally or emotionally. I remember going to therapy. It was physical therapy, and I would throw a big ball to my therapist, and she would throw it back, and I was smiling ear to ear, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Why am I laughing at this? This is not that fun. I don't know. I didn't understand why I was so happy doing such simple things, and it's like maybe my emotions were starting to come back at that point. But overall, I still didn't understand the reality of what had happened to me, because emotions are the last thing to heal after a head injury. And I hadn't shown any kind of genuine emotion since coming out of my coma. Your emotions are located in the frontal lobe of your brain, and remember that I was thrown all around the car, and my brain would hit with the front and back of my head, and so there had been lots of bruising and bleeding there. So there was tons of brain damage in the frontal lobe of my brain. Then one day, after about 6 weeks of outpatient therapy, it was in June, my mother and I were driving home from the rehab hospital as usual. And I remember saying to my mom, we were getting on the highway, I remember the on-ramp, I remember the exact time. I remember asking her a question. I said, I'm really messed up, for my mom. And she started to cry. And I was crying too. But she wasn't crying for the same reasons I was crying. I was crying because the reality had finally set in. She told me later that she cried because she was so relieved and happy that my emotions were finally coming back. I was becoming normal again. From that point forward, it was extremely difficult for me. I was still confined to a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. The entire right side of my body wasn't cooperating. Remember, I told you the right side was damaged more than my left side. I was having difficulty with my right leg, my right arm, my right hand with the dexterity and coordination. On top of that, nobody could understand me. I'd have to repeat myself 100 times. It was so frustrating. I remember I tried to form my words, and it was like my tongue was about 3 feet thick, and I couldn't form the words that I wanted to say. I had to rely on people to help me through it, for everything, even to help me to the bathroom. All these things I could do before without thinking, and now I had to concentrate on every single move to get my body to do what I wanted it to do. I used to be in great physical shape before my wreck, but I persevered. I mean, that's what I would be thinking. This is just the most frustrating thing I've ever had to deal with in my life. But I persevered and I continued. I thought, okay, if I just do this outpatient therapy, maybe I'll get better. So I did it for several more months, and my speech therapy for my cognitive skills, beyond doubt, did that for almost a year. That following September, I was able to go back to high school because, of course, this happened February 5th, and I was only a couple of months from graduating, so I was almost there, but I had to finish out my classes to graduate. So I went back to high school. While I was still in my wheelchair, I could take a few steps every now and then, but I couldn't really walk. So they saw me. They saw that I was in a wheelchair, and they automatically thought, wheelchair special education. Wheelchair special education. So they put me in special education. It was a breeze. Oh my gosh, it was so easy. I made hundreds on everything. I finished in 5 minutes. Everybody was taking like 30 minutes to do a simple exercise. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't belong in here. But they soon realized, okay, she doesn't belong in here. We're going to take her out and put her in mainstream classes. So I was still in my wheelchair, but I went to mainstream classes. But I very quickly realized that I couldn't keep up because I couldn't write fast enough to take notes or complete my assignments. Remember, I'm right-handed, and you saw my handwriting. It was super, super slow and super, super sloppy, and I just I couldn't write down what the teacher was saying fast enough. Since I had to retrain my brain pathways, it had taken me longer to get signals to my right hand. So the only way I could figure out to help myself was to train myself to become left-handed, so I could keep up, because the left side of my body healed almost to probably 99%. So around then, I went through an injury stage. I mourned the loss of being normal. I wanted to look normal. I wanted to walk normal. I used to be on the drill team in my school, and now I could never hope to even dance again. I wanted my friends back, all my friends that went off to college, and I had to go back to high school. I had to work so hard at everything. Nothing was easy, nothing was right. I just went through a really angry stage. But that's normal. The doctors told my parents that was normal. Well, I went on to graduate high school. By the end of that next semester, I attended junior college that next fall semester. I was walking on my own by then, but still had some balance issues. I remember I had to take a death grip on the railing of the stairs to walk up the stairs in college. Anyway, I said it all the time in order to keep up with everything. I had to study harder than everyone else because learning and retrieving information took longer because of my injuries. The pathways in my brain were no longer a straight shot. They had to kind of take a detour. I had to continually make new pathways. The doctors also warned me about this, that I would have many challenges at first. Only gets better with time. So I was eventually able to graduate from the University of Houston within 5.5 years. And I had a pretty good GPA, and I got a job, and it was a miracle that God gave me my intelligence back. As most of you who know me, it takes me a little longer to do some things. I walk with a silent because it takes my brain a little longer to get signals to the right side of my body. And sometimes it takes longer to retrieve information that I've known forever. I just don't remember for like a split second. It takes me a little bit longer to remember some stuff. So even though I had hard times back then, I was so grateful that I did not turn out like a usual severely headed person, that I wasn't dead, I wasn't a vegetable, I wasn't in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, and most of all, that I gained my mental faculties back. Jesus loves me so much. He changed my self-destructive direction and created beauty from ashes. Isaiah 61:3. To console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for their ashes, the oil of joy for the mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. God not only worked one miracle of saving my life, but many miracles, putting my brain back into position. The speed in which I healed, the ability to learn to walk again, to regain my mental faculties, to give me my intelligence back enough to where I could go to college and graduate, to have jobs and hold them, to find a husband and stay married. And most of all, I'm able to contribute to his kingdom, like being involved in this church. Because of his great mercy, Jesus Christ, God, intervened in so many ways. He changed my direction in my life way back then to point me in the right direction, the direction that he wanted me to go. He knew that's what it would take. It was a difficult process, but it brought glory to him and to many others along the way besides me. I have a quality of life that wouldn't have been possible without Jesus. Just like the story of Gideon, the odds were very impossible. The odds were completely impossible. He healed me despite the odds. Odds don't matter to God. And just like the story of Gideon, he gets the glory. Now, Jesus never doesn't take the back seat of my life. He now is in the front seat of my life. He is the driver of my life. I am so eternally grateful for what he has done for me. Glory be to God.